What's going on, guys? So in this video, what I want to do is show you how I've been using ChatGPT over the past few months as a developer, using it in my workflow to learn and also to make me a more productive and faster developer. So I know there's a lot of hype out there about ChatGPT. This isn't a hype video. It's very practical, and I just wanted to share with you guys how I've been using it. Now, if you don't really know what ChatGPT is, it's basically an advanced AI chatbot where you can ask it questions, you can converse with it back and forth, and it will remember your context. And it's just a phenomenal technology, and I think it's really going to change the game. And I think we're only going to see more of these types of tools in the future. And it's based on the GPT-3 model, but now you can also use it with GPT-4 if you're a Plus user. And GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, which is a language model developed by a company called OpenAI that uses deep learning to generate natural language text. And it's been trained on a massive data set from the internet, which allows it to generate responses to a wide range of prompts and questions. And as far as what you can use it for, the list is limitless, really. I mean, I use it for developer stuff, but I'll use it for like health questions and stuff like that, and actually have a conversation with it. So it's just, it's an amazing technology, and I didn't want to make a hype video. I almost didn't want to make any video on ChatGPT because I really don't like how everyone just jumps on the bandwagon and makes videos on stuff when they don't even really know what they're talking about. So this is my perspective. This is what I use it for, and I'm just hoping that some of you will, pick up on some of it and integrate it into your own workflow and help you with productivity. All right, so let's jump into it and let's look at 10 ways to use ChatGPT as a developer. Okay, so once you log in, you'll see an interface like this, which is very, very simple. And notice mine says Plus. That's because I'm logged in as a Plus user, which is $20 a month. And I'm basically paying for reliability so that it's always up, so I don't get any error messages telling me that I can't use it. And it's good to have if you're going to be using it a lot. If not, then stick with the free version. So in the middle top here, we have the model that's being used, which by default is GPT 3.5. Okay, now as a Plus user, I can choose GPT-4, but it has limitations. So currently, at this time, if you're watching this in the future, this may have changed, but right now there's a cap of 25 messages every 3 hours. All right, and it's noticeably slower. You can see here the little rating things here. So speed is at a 2, while GPT 3.5 speed is at 5. So it is noticeably slower. And you'll see when I prompt or I ask a question, it doesn't just plop the text on the screen, it kind of types it out. So I'm going to stick with GPT 3.5. Now, this brings us into the first way that I use ChatGPT for development, and that's just as a general learning tool. So we all have a preference when it comes to learning something new, whether that's video tutorials, courses, articles, books, documentation, other people's code, other people. There's so many different ways to learn, and everyone has a preference. And I think that not only ChatGPT, but just AI and chatbots in general are a new thing that we can add to that list. And honestly, it's one method that could put people like me out of business, people that teach online courses and so on. But I don't freak out about it because I know that there's still a need for that. There's always going to be a need for the human element. Now, when it comes to using ChatGPT as a learning tool, a general learning tool, you're going to develop your own strategies in terms of finding what you want, just like you do with Google and Stack Overflow and anything else. So before you develop your own strategy, I can tell you what I recommend, which is getting steps, examples, and resources. So instead of just saying, like, let's say we want to learn the 𝐹etch API, instead of saying, what is the 𝐹etch API, let's ask for the steps to learn the 𝐹etch API. So I'll say, I want to learn about the 𝐹etch API, and I'll say, what are the steps that I should take. And before we go over the response here, I just want you to see that on the sidebar, now we have a new chat. And it will name it, but we can rename it if we want. And what I usually do here, since we can't have folders for different categories, which I think would be a great feature, what I do is give it a category. So I could say like JavaScript and then colon and then say fetch API. That way, if we have any other conversations that have to do with JavaScript, I can prefix it with JavaScript. All right, and you can delete it. You can also clear all your conversations. But everything that we talk about in this context is going to be saved. Even if we open a new chat and we start to talk about something completely different, we can always go back to this conversation. Now, as far as what it gave us, you can see it's a pretty well-written list of steps. So understand the basics of HTTP, familiarize yourself with promises, learn the fetch API, syntax and all that, practice with examples, explore additional features, consider compatibility, stay up to date. So pretty good list. And again, you can just keep this conversation and you can always reference back to it. Now, what's really great about ChatGPT isn't just the answers that it gives you, but the fact that you can conversate back and forth and it remembers context. If you've ever tried this with like Amazon Echo or Google Home, and you ask a question, you get some half-ass answer. If you ask another question and you try to reference what you just said, it doesn't know what the hell you're talking about. So ChatGPT is great for that. So what I'm going to do is say, tell me more about, and let's see, we have, let's say number 2. Just by me saying number 2, it should know what I'm talking about. And it says, sure, promises are a fundamental part of JavaScript, blah, blah, blah. And it gives me an example. And that brings me to the second thing, which are examples. So it'll give you code examples. They're not always correct. I do want to stress that, especially if it's more complex stuff. You might have to prompt it a few times to kind of get what you need. And we'll get more into that in a little bit. But let's say, show me an example of the fetch API and a post request. Okay, so it gives me an example. It's using data from a form and then making a fetch request. It's putting the form data in the body, getting the response. It's checking for any errors and getting the JSON. All right, and we can ask for something else, or we can ask to change this up. Like, let's say, show me this example using async await. And there we go. So it gives me an async function called login, and then does the same thing, except we're awaiting on the fetch requests, and we're getting our JSON. So that's examples. And then I'd also say ask for resources. ChatGPT itself is a resource, but you might want to watch a video or books or whatever. So I'll say, what are some good books? I'll just say, what are some good books? And it should know what I'm talking about, that I mean the fetch API. So there are many great books on web development and related topics. Okay, maybe it didn't specifically answer with the fetch API. So I'll say, what about books good for the fetch API? Okay, so some recommendations. We have Fetch API in Depth by Jake Archibald, Modern JavaScript Collection, JavaScript Novice to Ninja. Let's say, what about YouTube videos? So we get Fetch API Tutorial by Traversy Media, working with the Fetch API by Wes Boss, Net Ninja. So all great resources, free code camp. So that's what I would suggest, just for learning in general. Ask for steps, ask for examples, and ask for resources. Now, another thing that it's good for is code feedback, asking it to look at your code and make any suggestions. So I'm going to open up a new chat here, and then I'm going to grab some code from a GitHub repository. And I'm going to use the 50 projects, 50 days, just because they're small projects and there's just a single JavaScript file in most of these. So let's grab the drawing app. Take our script.js, copy that code, and then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say, can you provide some feedback on this code? And you don't have to format or anything, just paste it in. So the code looks well written and organized. Here are a few suggestions. Add comments to describe each section of the code. This will make it easier, blah, blah, blah. Add error handling. For example, if the canvas element is not found, the code will throw an error. You can add a try-catch block. So that's I don't disagree with that. Consider adding touch events in addition to mouse events. Okay. Consider adding keyboard shortcuts to make it easier for users to interact with the application. So I think this is really useful, especially for someone like me that works from home, that doesn't have any other developer around to check my stuff and give me suggestions. The only other option I have is to post in a public forum, which doesn't always go that well. So I think it's a great way to use ChatGPT. So the next thing that I want to look at is finding solutions to specific problems. And not even just problems, but just little tasks that you want to do. So let's say we want to scrape a web page using Python. So I'll say, how can I scrape a web page using Python? So scraping a web page in Python can be done using various libraries such as requests and Beautiful Soup 4 and LXML. And it gives us an example. So we're importing requests and Beautiful Soup. We get a URL that we want to scrape, get the response, pass it into a Beautiful Soup instance, and then we can get all the links or all the paragraphs, whatever it is that we want. So very simple. And of course, you could Google this, go through a few pages, go through the Beautiful Soup documentation, but that's going to take a little bit. This is going to increase your productivity. So let's say we want to create a utility function to convert Celsius to Fahrenheit. Let's say, give me a function to convert, and I'm not even going to say Celsius to Fahrenheit. I'm going to say C to F, and we'll see if that works. So here's a function that converts temperature in Celsius to Fahrenheit. So it knew what I meant just by C to F. All right, and it's using Python. I didn't specify it here, but since we're already using Python in the past prompt, it's going to use Python. But we could say, what about JavaScript? And it will give me the same code in JavaScript. Another thing that this is useful for is brainstorming, and it could be for anything. It could be brainstorming a name for your company or just ideas for an application. Let's say that, again, we're learning JavaScript. We just learned how to use the geolocation API, and we want to create an app that utilizes it. So I'll say, give me some ideas for an app that uses the geolocation API. All right, so let's see. Local events, an app that uses geolocation to provide users with a list of events happening in their local areas. Neighborhood guide, campus map, running app, travel app, geocaching app, emergency services. So some pretty good ideas that are generated for you. If you don't like any of these, you can ask for more. And if you want to proceed with one of them, like let's say, how would we, I'll just say, tell me more about number 3, which is the campus map. Sure, a campus map can be useful tool for students, faculty, and visitors to navigate around a college or university campus. And goes on to give us some features. And you can just keep going with this, and it's going to be your kickoff point for a new project. All right, so the next one is huge for me, and that's generating sample data. Because oftentimes I'll need a bunch of sample data for a project, and I hate trying to figure out which type of data I should use, and then thinking of all the fields and values, and then typing it all out. We can get ideas on data as far as the type of data, the fields, the values. We can get all that from ChatGPT. It can also help us generate the data itself. And I've used this for my own projects and for my own courses. It's a huge time saver. And it can be formatted in any way you can think of, JSON, CSV, XML, whatever. So let's go ahead and let's ask for some sample data for some coding boot camps. I actually did an API for coding boot camps in my Node.js course, And this would have been helpful back then because I had to, think of it all and type it all out myself. But I could just say, I need some sample data. I need a JSON array with, what should I say here? I'll say a JSON array of 10 coding boot camps with at least 10 fields each. All right, let's see what that gives us. So we get an array, JSON array, and we get objects of boot camp. So name, Flatiron School location, website, programming languages, programming duration, tuition, job placement, curriculum, rating. So this is probably one of my favorite uses for ChatGPT. And if I don't like something here, like let's say I don't want, the programming language, I'll say take out the programming languages field. So now if I scroll down, it should give me the same thing, but it'll leave out the programming languages field. And there we go. So no programming language field. Now let's say I want this in a different format. I'm going to say, give me the same data in, we'll just say in XML. And now we have all of our boot camps in XML format. And there are websites that can do this kind of stuff like Mockaroo. There's other services, and I think a lot of those, I don't want to say they're going to go obsolete, but I think that in a lot of cases, ChatGPT and OpenAI tools in general, even some of the APIs, are going to replace a lot of those little services. So the next thing that I want to look at is writing documentation. So let's open up a new chat, and I have an old Laravel API that I want to see if it will generate documentation for. So let's see, it's called Larticles or Larticles right here. And all I'm going to do is take the URL. So I'm going to copy the URL, and you can be specific about what kind of documentation do you want. Do you want Markdown or YAML or whatever? I'm just going to say give me, or let's say generate the documentation for this Laravel API, and then I'm just going to paste in the GitHub link. All right, so right away it gives us this document with the base URL, the endpoints, so get/articles. It gives us an example of a response. Get a single article gives us a response. Create an article. So just by giving it a URL, just by showing it the GitHub, it was able to generate all this for us. And then even authentication gives us the access token back, so to register a user, etc. And I'm just generalizing. I'm not being specific at all. You can really specify what kind of documentation, what should be included. I'm just saying generate some docs, and it's giving me a pretty good response. All right, so the next thing is getting more information from errors, because we've all gotten crazy errors that we don't understand and we don't know what the hell it means. In fact, a recent example is I actually run a modded Minecraft server, and it was crashing and chunks weren't loading. So I decided to go into the logs, and I just grabbed a big snippet of the log file, and I pasted it in ChatGPT, and it knew exactly what was wrong. It told me which mods were causing the issue, which ones to disable, and it helped me debug my Minecraft server. So that's why I decided to pay $20 a month, because I literally use this thing for everything. And I know it sounds like I'm trying to sell you something, but believe me, I don't get any cut or anything from this. I just want you guys to be able to use this to help you in your, in your life in general. Now, just to give you an example of kind of the workflow when it comes to error messages, I'm going to just open up, that's not right. I'm going to open up the code for a simple state capital search. In fact, I'll show you the project. I believe this was an old YouTube video, but I'm just going to open this up and show you that we can just search for MA, and it'll show the states that start with MA, and it'll show the capitals, and it's just coming from a JSON file. So I want to break this on purpose. So let's go back into the code here, not the HTML, I want the JavaScript. And what I'll do is where we're getting the matches, so we're basically matching a regular expression, I'm going to change state. I'm just going to add an S to that. So that's going to break the application. So if I come over here now and I open up my console and I try to search, you can see I'm getting this type error, cannot read properties of undefined, reading match. It tells us the line number, and this is pretty easy and pretty self-explanatory to fix, but let's just say that we don't know what's happening. So I'm going to just copy the error message, and what I'll do is go into ChatGPT and just say, can you tell me what this error message means and how to fix it? And then I'm going to paste the error message in, and it needs to, obviously it needs to know the code as well. I mean, I could ask what it means, but I want it to fix it too. So I'm going to grab all this code and copy it, and I'm just going to hit space and then paste in the code. So it doesn't have to be formatted nicely, it'll figure it out. All right, so the error message, let's see, means that somewhere in the code the program is trying to access the match property of an object that is undefined or null. In this particular case, the error is occurring on line 12, where the match property is being accessed on the states.name object. So to fix this error, you should change the filter function on line 10 to access the name property of each state object. So as you can see, it took away the S that I added. All right, so it's telling me exactly how to fix it. So if I grab this and go back into, whoops, again, that's the wrong code. We want, I have so many damn windows open. So I'll just replace this with what it gave me, save it, and let's come back over to the project, type in M, and now it works. So that's the workflow for getting an error and trying to fix it. It doesn't always work out that smooth. That's a pretty simple error to fix, but that's the workflow that I've been using as far as using, finding out what errors mean. All right, now I want to continue to use this project to show you the next one, which is writing tests or creating unit tests. So you can have ChatGPT create unit tests for you, and it could be in any language, any testing library. I'm going to use Jest. So I'm going to say, can you give me, I'll say, can you generate a unit test for the search, is it search states? I think it's called search states. For the search states function using Jest. And let's see what it does. All right, so sure, here's an example. So we're bringing in the file, describes search states function, test, returns an empty array when search text is empty. All right. Returns an array of matching states when search text is not empty. So it's passing in AL here as an example, and it should equal this, it should equal Alabama. Okay, and if it's empty, then it should equal just an empty array. So it generated this test that we can now run using the Jest testing library. So the next thing that I want to look at is natural language programming, which is I talked a little bit about before, and I think really scares a lot of people because they feel like it's going to put them out of a job. But I think in many cases, it's just going to change your job, and in many cases make things easier for you because you'll be able to do things faster because you don't actually have to write the code. You can instruct the AI on what you want to do. Now, I still think you're going to have to really have good foundational knowledge in programming in general, but I think you'll be able to switch from language to language as long as you understand the fundamentals. For instance, if you want to create a REST API, you have to understand what goes into that. You might not have to know the exact syntax, though, because of natural language programming. So let me give you an example. I'm going to say new chat, and I'm going to purposely use a language that I don't know too much about. I know a little bit of Rust, I've dabbled with it, but I wouldn't say I'm fluent in it by any stretch of the imagination. So we're going to use Rust. Let's say I need a REST API built with Rust, and I'm going to say it should have products with the fields of ID, name, description, and category underscore ID. And I'm going to say the category ID should have a relationship with another resource called categories. Okay, so that category ID, I want to be connected to categories, and let's say categories should have an ID and a name field. So I'm constructing my data here just in plain English. And then I'm going to say let's use an SQL, we'll say SQLite database. And I'll say use any frameworks and libraries that you see fit. All right, so before I go ahead and submit this, even if I don't have any knowledge of Rust, I need to know how APIs work. I need to know how collections or tables work, fields, relationships. I need to know what kind of database I want to use. So let's just go ahead and run this and see what we get. So it's going to basically give us instructions on how to create this, because obviously it can't just like log into your machine and create your files for you, at least yet. Probably at some point it will, but for now it's telling us to create a new app using Cargo, add our dependencies. Looks like it's using Rocket, which is a framework. And then we're constructing our tables, so categories with an ID and a name, type is integer and text. Products has an ID, name, description, and a category ID. And then we're joining the tables, because remember I said to have a relationship between category ID and then the ID and the categories table. So it creates that. Then we're defining our models. So creating our category model, and down here creating our product model. Now it does this a lot. It just stops, and it does this when you have just a lot, a big response. So what I usually do, what usually works is you can say continue. We'll say continue where you left off. Hopefully that will be fixed in the future. So it says, whoops, sorry about that. Here's the rest of the code. So it like just falls asleep or something. All right, so we're establishing a connection using SQLite, database URL, and then we're creating our endpoints, right? So /categories, function called getCategories, and we're gonna print out the JSON, so the categories JSON from that route. Then we can get the category by ID. Down here, post request to category is going to create a category. So even though I'm not very fluent with Rust, I mean, it's pretty clear what this is doing because I understand the fundamentals of a REST API and data models and all that stuff. So I think that understanding those fundamentals, I think that stuff is going to be really, really important moving forward. The syntax, the code syntax that you're learning isn't as important as knowing what is actually happening. And I think that's always been true, but I think it's going to be even more true with AI, with all this new technology. All right, so the last thing that I want to look at is creating UIs using either just HTML and CSS or using Tailwind or Bootstrap or anything like that. Even using React UI libraries, you could do that, but we're just going to stick with HTML and CSS. And I'm just going to paste in the text here and I'll read it. So I said I need an HTML and CSS. I need HTML and CSS in separate files for a blog homepage with a nav bar with a logo on the left and links on the right, a hero area with a background image and centered text. Under that should be 3 cards and a horizontal flex box The cards should have a light gray background and a box shadow. Use light blues and greens and use the Poppins font. Okay, so we'll see what that gives us. Now, I will say that the UI stuff, the design stuff, is probably one of the weak points when it comes to getting help. You can get something really cool, but you have to work with it. I'm sure that the first run with this isn't going to look very good, but we'll see what we get. So I'm going to copy that, and then I have VS Code open with just an HTML and CSS file. So we'll save that, and then we'll grab the CSS. And let's throw that in. All right, so we'll check that out. Let's go ahead and open this with Live Server. All right, so that doesn't look too bad, actually. I mean, it doesn't look good, but as far as what I asked for the layout, it's correct. I asked for a nav bar with the logo over here, links over here, a hero with a background image with some text, and then my cards, horizontal cards. Let's see, is it, well, it's not responsive, but you could just go back and say, you know, add some media queries and make it responsive. It's going to take a while. You're not just going to get a great layout from one prompt. You gotta work with it. But for people that aren't great with CSS and alignment and all that, I think that it can really be beneficial. And if we look at the CSS, so let's see, we have our general styles. It even gives us some comments for the different parts. So we have a reset, we have our font, Poppins font, our nav bar, which uses flexbox, justify spaces between. So this is pretty much what I would do. Hero, 400 pics for the height. We have a random image from 𝐸CSUM. Yeah, so this all looks good. I mean, you should probably have an overlay for your hero because it's not very readable, but you can go back and you can ask it to do that. Card styles, so you have your card container, which is a flexbox, padding 50 pixels. Yeah, so I mean, it's not too bad. It's better than I expected. It doesn't look that great, but the structure is there, so you can continue and work off that. All right, guys, so I know this was a long video. We did a lot, but hopefully you can take at least a couple of these and integrate them into your workflow. I think it will really increase your productivity, and I think it'll help you learn in many cases. So that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video.